Hi, everyone. I'm McKenna. I'm the owner at Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. And I am so excited today because despite having extreme burnout, full disclosure, on virtual events during COVID, there is nothing better than what's happening today, which is Louise Penny in conversation with Alan Bradley, two of our absolute favorite authors. These two series that they've written just have been such contributions to the genre. And I am very, very, very happy to have them both here today. I'm going to do kind of short bios on them both and get out of the way so that they can have a lovely conversation that we will just get to sit back and listen to. Alan Bradley is here to talk about his new Flavia de Luce novel, What Time the Sexton's Spade Doth Rust. He is the New York Times bestselling author of many short stories, children's stories, newspaper columns, and the memoir, The Shoebox Bible. His first Flavia de Luce novel, The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie, received the Crime Writers Association debut Dagger Award, the Dilys Winn Award, the Arthur Ellis Award, the Agatha Award, the Macavity Award, and the Barry Award, and was also nominated for the Anthony Award. We are also very fortunate to have with us Louise Penny, who has graciously joined us to interview and chat with Alan. Louise Penny is the multi-award-winning author of the Chief Inspector Gamache novels set in her home province of Quebec, Canada. Her books, including State of Terror, written with Hillary Rodham Clinton, have sold more than 18 million copies, topped international bestseller lists, including the New York Times, and been translated into 32 languages. The recipient of both the Order of Canada and the Ordre National de Quebec, her country's highest civilian honors, her Three Pines Foundation reaches out to those in crisis and offers financial and emotional support with a special focus on literacy as well as dementia care. Her husband, Michael, died of dementia in 2016. She lives with her golden retriever, Muggins, in a village south of Montreal. And she does have a new book coming out, which we're all eagerly anticipating, Gray Wolf. And hopefully maybe at the end, we'll hear a little bit about that. For now, we've got a great crowd watching. I'm going to be monitoring comments. So those of you who have questions, don't be shy. You can put them in the comments on Facebook or in the chat here on YouTube, and we will try to get to them in a little bit. But for now, I'm going to duck out and just enjoy this. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you, McKenna, and thank you, Murder by the Book, and congratulations, Alan. This is such an exciting day. How are you feeling?
I can hardly believe it. After all this time, it's been a few years since the last book.
It's been 5 years, in fact, I believe. Is that
something like that? Yes, yeah. I thought for a while that the series might not continue, but that seems to be not the case.
I want to get into that actually in a moment, but before we do, can you bring us up to date on Flavia and this latest book?
Sure. I think I've said before several times, Flavia talks to me all the time. She talks to me when I'm trying to sleep. And do you have that? Do you have that problem with your?
I've had to, it's Armand, thankfully not Ruth or the duck, but yes, I've had to ask them to leave me alone. Do you?
No, I don't. I jump up and grab a pencil and I write them because I have no idea what they're talking about. I just know that it must be important. And so I jot it down. But Flavia talks to me a lot at night, and she delivers sort of one-liners and sometimes even ideas about objects and places. So I've gathered a huge collection of notes that have been building up because I never turn her down. I know that would be fatal. And so she's given me a lot of material, and I realized that she really wanted to start another book. And since I'm only the fingers at the keyboard, it's relatively easy on my part to just apply myself and let her do the talking. And it became evident right away that Flavia had an idea that it might be fun to have a mystery where you had to work backwards at solving it, because quite often amateur sleuths and detectives seem to have no problem at all getting in where the bodies are. They barge in and out as if they had a special pass, and in real life that doesn't happen. So I thought it would be fun to let her explore having to solve a mystery without actually seeing the body. That she has to put it together from information, from gossip, and pumping other people and speculating and having conversations with Dagger and whatnot. And it's sort of like one of those jigsaw puzzles that you do upside down where it's blank on the back.
Oh,
And so we did that, and it went a lot smoother than I thought it would. The only problem that I had with it was because I was kind of distracted and tied up occasionally. I wrote it in different scenes, and then I had to put them together when I was finished. And that was, I think, the most difficult thing that I've ever done, was to try and put together something like about maybe a dozen different settings and times and places and viewpoints. And
wow, so that was like a puzzle itself as well.
It was, yeah, it was a puzzle on top of a puzzle. And fortunately, I had the assistance of my editor at Random House in New York, and she was very, very patient. And she kept saying, take your time, don't rush it, just do it. And I'd shuffle the pieces around and put it together, and we'd look at it, and she'd say, well, yeah, it's not too bad, but something isn't a little bit clear. So I'd shuffle it around again. And eventually I did a semi-major rewrite on it to get all the timing right and everything. But I think it turned out okay.
And this is another poisoning. Is that
yeah.
Flavia is kind of Flavia is a sort of an expert on that.
She is, yes. She is. In the first book, she has a passion for poisons, and she loves puttering around with absolutely lethal materials. Flavia is never happier than when she's playing with death cap mushrooms and cyanide and so forth. And she's very fortunate because she has a lab, an Edwardian lab in the house where she lives that belonged to her famous or notorious Uncle Tarquin. And Uncle Tarquin was a chemist who was involved in every aspect of chemistry, including the shady aspect. So Flavia pores over his notebooks and learns a lot of things that she shouldn't know.
Now, Flavia, you've aged her in this book. Was that difficult?
No, I don't think it was. In the first book, Flavia was almost 11. She described herself as almost 11. And we've gone through 10 books, which are roughly 4 books covering a year. So we're on, Flavia is somewhere 2 years on from almost 11. So she's between 12 and 13. And her sense of herself is changing. And I can feel that. Yeah, when I'm writing, I know that her responses in many ways are maturing, and she's beginning to realize that some of the things that she's done in her life are not very admirable, but she's certainly not going to apologize for it. So she has a rocky relationship with 2 older sisters, and wonder where she got that from.
Which I want to get into that as well. Yeah, but can you? Yeah, I mean, I have to ask. I mean, you're an older man, and were when you started Flavia, the series, but you write about a young girl. Now, how do you? Why and how?
Well, I remember that age very vividly. And I can remember one of the wisest things that I ever read in my life. I think I was in grade 9, and I think it was in a textbook, so it might have been grade 10. I think it was a Latin textbook, and there was a quotation from Seneca, and it said roughly, hang on to your youthful idealism. You're going to need it when you're old. And I thought, I've never heard anything that was so true, that you really do need to hang on to your idealism. So I think part of my mind is almost 11. And
you're an almost 11-year-old girl.
almost 11. And there's no difference between an 11-year-old girl and an 11-year-old boy.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think ultimately most humans are pretty much the same. We all kind of want the same things in our core. But still, it would have been more natural, would it not, to tell us how Flavia first appeared to you? And then I want to move forward, but I think this is just fascinating.
Okay. I had been writing another mystery at the time. I had retired from the university, and we were living in Kelowna. And I was writing another mystery story, which I thought was very good. It was about a young woman who worked for CBC television in the very early days in Toronto in 1953, whatever it was, when they broadcast the upside down test pattern. And I had written the novel up to the point where the Canadian first chapter took place, and the young woman went to England, and she met a man, and the man had helped her with her investigation. And in doing that, he drove out into the countryside to ask some questions of a reclusive country squire. And I had him driving an old Rolls Royce with the roof stripped back and the back of it full of potted plants. And he went up to the house, and he got out of the car, and all of a sudden there was this girl sitting on a camp stool. And I thought, hold on a minute, I didn't write that. I have no idea who she is. And I don't have time for her because I need to get him up to the door. He has questions to ask. And I tried to write. He walked to the door, and I couldn't do it. It would not work. I had him try to sneak around the side of the house and go in through the French doors, and he wouldn't do it. And so finally I realized that he sees this girl sitting on a camp chair, and he has to go and talk to her. I thought, I can't write about her if I don't know her name. So maybe I can get her to tell me what her name is. And he went over and he talked to her. And the first thing he said, and it wasn't me saying it, it was him. He said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm writing down number plates or license plate numbers." And he was a very sarcastic character. And he said, "Well, I don't expect you'll get very many in such an out-of-the-way place." And this girl said, "Well, I've got yours, haven't I?" I knew, I think I knew that my ship was sinking. Somebody else had taken over the book. I needed to find out who she was. So I went through a series of long walks trying to guess her name, like Rumpelstiltskins. And after a long time, after months and months of walking and thinking, I guessed her name. And as soon as I did that, she started talking to me. Wow. And I had to put away the television book and let Flavia go back to the beginning and tell the story in her own words. And wow. all I needed to do was just stand by and keep my mouth shut. And so I've been doing that for 11 books now.
Wow.
Yeah, just one quick thing I wanted to say. The way that came about, which was directly inspired by you, and particularly by Still Life, which I admire with all my heart. I love that book. And it was, my wife was quilting, doing almost full-time quilting as a hobby. And she loved silence. She loved to be in her quilting studio with total silence and a cat and a quilt. That was heaven to her. And she said to me one day, why don't you get me a radio to put in while I'm quilting? I could listen to the radio. And I thought that's strange because she's never done that before. But I did have a very nice Grundig shortwave radio, and I put it in her quilting studio. And the first day she listened to it, she turned it on, and lo and behold, you were talking to Sheila Rogers, and you told Sheila Rogers about the Crime Writers Association having a contest. And I think you gave quite specific instructions about how to go about finding
Did I
that.
actually say, I think I even said, Alan Bradley, you must apply for, did I say that to Sheila?
Yeah, I don't remember because I didn't hear the broadcast. Shirley heard it, but she wrote down your name and she wrote down the address and she brought it in on a piece of paper and she said, "Here, do this." And I said, "No, no, no, I'm doing my other mystery." And she said, "No, no, do Flavia." And so I sent Flavia off to the CWA, and it won the debut Dagger, of course.
And changed your life. And that was the sweetness at the bottom of the pie, which
It was, yeah.
And you were, I believe, you were 16. You were in your 60s at that time.
I was 69 at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, almost 69, as Flavia would say. So how did your life change? What changed then because Sweetness was brilliant, as all your books are, but it just exploded onto the scene because such a fresh voice and such a surety about your voice.
It totally caught me by surprise. I thought that it was quite a good book because I worked on it so hard, but it was picked up in Canada and the US and then in the UK, and it went on to, I think, something like 34 territories and 30, 33, 32 languages. And the big thing that it did was that it allowed me to travel because in my work, I had never really been able to travel. I was sort of stuck in a TV studio with a screwdriver behind the cameras or under the floor or something like that. And it was other people were the ones who traveled, but not me. And when the book came out, we were able to go everywhere. It was a fantastic tour of Europe, so many different countries, and meeting wonderful people and just strange, brilliant things happening. Readers are just such lovely people to meet and talk to. And I should say, by the way, there was never a country that I went to that I didn't see your books. Always, everywhere: Croatia, Finland, Malta, Germany, Poland.
I mean, I just want to say to all the people listening, you can see why Alan Bradley is adored. You are so supportive and so kind to other authors, and thank you. That means a lot to me. Tell me, you said that young girls and young boys at that age are essentially pretty much the same. What were you like growing up?
Oh gosh, I was a horror. I think I was quite reclusive because I had been a reader. My sisters taught me to read before I went to kindergarten, and so I think I was kind of insufferable. But I was reading everything that I could get my hands on, so I didn't really ever have much of a social life. I liked being around the house or outdoors reading, and I was so fortunate to grow up in two households, my own and my grandmother's, where books were treasured. And they had wonderful things. They had Jane Austen, they had Mark Twain, they had James Joyce, believe it or not. And that was the kind of stuff I was reading. By the time I got to high school, I kind of graduated to Steinbeck, and that more of the novels, a little bit of Hemingway, not much. And I'm just now getting back to them. I've sort of come full circle. I've been reading anything I can lay my hands on. My library here. It's, when you're in England, in the UK, where all the books are different from the books that you see in Canada, and the charity shops are full of wonderful, expensive books for 50p. How can you not buy them?
It's interesting that you describe yourself as being kind of solitary, because that's in talking to a lot of authors, and I know you do too, our colleagues. That's a fairly common theme among writers, is that as children they grew up sort of feeling that they're on an island looking at the mainland, that they don't really quite fit in anywhere. Was that sort of how you felt as well?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly how I felt, especially going into grade 9. I had enormous difficulties with the system, and it was because of my reading. I can remember a teacher asking the first week of grade 9, how many books have you all read during the summer? And some said none, and some said 1, and some said 2 or 3. And I didn't say anything. And when the teacher asked me, how many books have you read during the summer? I thought, well, I go to the library about roughly 4 or 5 times a week. So say 4 times a week. And every time I get about three books. So it's about 12 books a week. And the summer holidays were 12 weeks during July and August. So I said roughly 100.
Oh, Alan.
And that was the biggest mistake I ever made in my life. I was sent to the office, and
She didn't believe you?
no, she thought I was being smart or something. She didn't believe me at all. And I think I realized at that moment that I was on my own. That, as a reader, you don't often have company. Reading is a very lonely occupation, and you don't.
Writing, of course.
And writing, yeah, that's why I like it so much.
Yeah, but the other thing that it gave you was this vivid imagination, because you didn't have the diversion of sports teams and other things, and necessarily friends.
No,
Yeah.
books and movies were my thing when I was a kid, and I sort of had unlimited access to both of them. And I've been so fortunate to have had that, because books have been my life, really.
It's interesting talking to you and listening to you describe your upbringing and your life. And the thing with Flavia and your books is that there is such, there's I don't want to say they're lighthearted, because they're serious and they're thoughtful, but there is a kind of a levity about them, a kind of a joy, don't you find?
I think there is. There's kind of a grim humor in families, isn't there?
Yeah.
And Flavia,
life. She's so passionate and curious, and she's bursting with energy.
Right. She's not dependent on other people. I think that's what I like about her, is that she's extremely independent. And I love the idea of an 11-year-old girl being like that. I think that's wonderful.
Yes.
And I'm glad to hear from people that say that's just like me. And I love hearing that from people that have read the books.
Yes. What is it? Can you describe your writing day? What that's like?
Well, when I was doing it at my peak, I guess, I liked writing at about 4:30 in the morning, and I would get up and put a laptop on my knee, and I had 2 cats on my feet, and I would write for about maybe 4 hours, and then go have breakfast. And I found that worked for me because you could feel all self-righteous for the rest of the day. You know, you'd done your work, and you could do whatever you wanted for the rest of the day, and that was very nice. But as I've got older, I find that I don't work very well at 4:30, so I tend to um, try to capture the idea of the Victorian portable writing desk, and I write wherever I am. If I'm sitting in the kitchen, or if I'm sitting looking out the window, I have a board on my lap, and I can write. So I'm movable, I guess.
How do you come up with the titles for the books? I mean, I mean, this one is What Time the Sexton Spade Doth Rust. Where did that come from, Alan?
Right. That came from a discussion with my agent, Denise Bukowski. We were looking at some titles, and I had come up with another one, which I didn't really like very much. It was okay as a working title, but when it came
Can you
time
remember what was it? Can you remember what it was?
no, I can't. It was that bad, I guess. I can tell you about Sweetness. I remember where Sweetness came from. And in fact, I brought this along with me. I have a weakness for old reference books. I love old Whitaker's almanacs and old Encyclopedia Britannica from 1929 and that kind of stuff, and old dictionaries. And we were walking along one day in Saskatoon in a residential area, and we came to a yard sale, and the people had a boxed set of 6 dictionaries. It was called the Modern Eclectic Dictionary of the English Language.
Wonderful.
I don't know if I can get this thing. No, it won't focus. Anyway, I carried this around, the 6 volumes. I carried them around the house with me and dipped into them whenever I could. And I got through, I was in the first volume, A, B, C, and I was reading the C words, and I came to the word crinkle. And I thought, that's a nice word. You know, why don't we use crinkle? I haven't heard anybody say crinkle for years and years and years, and I would like to use it. And this dictionary, like all good Victorian dictionaries, has an example where they use the word in a sentence to show you how it should be properly used. And the sentence they had was from a book of cookery by William King, and it was written entirely in verse, The Art of Cookery, entirely in verse. This was during the 1600s. And somewhere in the poem, he said, unless some sweetness at the bottom lie, who cares for all the crinkling of the pie?
Oh, my.
And I thought, that's it. That's it. That's a book title. And I hadn't written the book yet. So,
No, is that right? Oh,
yeah, I had the title for quite a long time, years, maybe 10 years. And then when I was writing the Flavia book, I didn't have a title for it. And Flavia wouldn't tell me what it was. There's certain things that she won't tell me. And I realized it was the scene where she went to the school and is climbing up the bell tower. And it just suddenly struck me. I'm writing the sweetness at the bottom of the pie.
Wow. And she let you.
She let me. Yeah, I went back to page 1 and I put the title in.
I love this story. You're such an interesting man. Do you know what interests me too? I mean, this may be just a little bit in the weeds, but in the early days, in the first couple of books, I would come up with titles, particularly for the second book, and the publisher would keep calling it book 2. So clearly not adopting my title. How was it? Did you have to fight with them to accept the sweetness at the bottom of the pie? Because it is quite an unusual title.
Yes, yeah, that's a very perceptive question. I did. They were in the beginning. They thought that it was too long and it was too vague, but it was the one thing that I insisted on, was that it was part of the book. And in fact, I had one of the characters more or less use the phrase in the book just to justify the title. The one that was really difficult was The Weed That Strings the Hangman's Bag, the second book. And they thought that was way too wordy, way too many words, too hard to remember, nothing memorable about it. But again, I was sort of unyielding, I guess, stubborn. And they went with the title. And at that point, they started to get proud of them. They talked about these lovely long titles, and I realized I'm okay. I made it.
Right. But still, I mean, what time the Sexton's spade doth rust? Is that a phrase from the book itself, or how does that? I know you said that your agent helped you with that one.
Yes, yeah. It has to do with time. It's about time and the consideration of time. And in this book, there's a fairly major plot point that involves time with Flavia and the de Luce family. And so as a time factor, I thought it was nice to have time in the title. And of course, Flavia adores rust. Like she loves coffin wood and rust and graves and mold and stuff. So the rust was good. And I suggested that they use a rust color on the cover of the book, and they immediately adopted my idea, and they came up with the most wonderful cover with a green poison bottle and a rust cover. I love it.
Your covers are really compelling too. I remember saying to my publishers early on, I want a cover like Alan's cover. They're really neat. And they said, no, he's cornered that market. You can't. Then now you're just going to be following the man. But they're wonderful covers.
They're wonderful. They've all been designed by Joe Montgomery in New York City. And he did the first one. The wisdom in publishing was don't ever publish a book with a green cover. And he designed a book that was a bright green cover, and it had a black bird with an orange stamp impaled on its bill. And nobody even...
I mean, maybe someone should have told Penguin about the green covers. Never do it.
Yeah, well, I started seeing green covers after Sweetness came out. I noticed that there were more green covers than there used to be.
Now you got to tell me, did you use the word crinkle? Do you use it in every book? That would be cool. The word crinkle.
No, I should. I used it in Sweetness in the epigraph. I quoted William King's Book of Cookery. But I still think that we should use crinkle more. And do you have a favorite word?
I like anesthesiologist.
Wow.
It's just, it goes trippingly off the tongue, but I must admit I have never actually used it, I think, in a book. But I'll try. Do you know what? Maybe we can switch. I'll use crinkle. You can use anesthesiologist.
Okay, you've got it.
Right. Our next book. I want to go to the listener questions in a moment, but I do want to ask if you have, because I'm sure that there are aspiring writers listening now. Do you have any thoughts for them?
I have a few. I used to teach a bit of writing at the university in my spare time, not as a job. And one of the things that I told people who are writing scripts is rule number one is move your verbs forward. And rule number two is swap the adjectives, adverbs and adjectives, putting them after the word that they modify rather than in front of it, or at least try. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And if you can't get the verb up front, put it at the end. That was a thing that I've clung to quite tenaciously. And the only other thing that I have writing advice is, as you would say to a dog, sit.
That's so true, isn't it? Just
It is. Just sit.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. Let's go to McKenna again, who is one of the owners of Murder by the Book. Hi, McKenna.
Hi, this has been absolutely wonderful. We do have some questions from the crowd, so let's get started. The first one, which I accidentally popped on the screen earlier, my cursor got a little excited, was from Jody. Both of you have terrific narrators for your audiobooks. Do you have a say in who gets the job? And Alan, why don't you answer that first?
Yes, no, I don't think we do, but I was blessed with having Jane Entwistle right from the beginning. And Jane gets more fan mail than I do. Honestly, she's people write and ask, how can I get in touch and how can I get Jane's autograph and that kind of thing. And she does a wonderful job of Flavia. I like them very much. I had an opportunity about 6 or 7 years ago to talk to her by satellite. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful conversation because her insight into the character is the same as mine. And we were talking at a pitch that I couldn't believe at the time. I don't know. Louise, how do you feel about that?
But I don't listen. Do you listen? You listen to your audiobooks then, do you?
I've listened to parts of some of them. I've never listened to all of them. I find that they influence me too much.
You see, that's the same with me. When the first one arrived with Ralph Cosham, the wonderful Ralph Cosham as the narrator, I was so excited. I think it was on a cassette. That might have even been an 8-track cassette, and put it in. And I the first sentence of Still Life, and I had to turn it off. Exactly for that. I could feel it infiltrating. And
Yes. Yeah.
I don't want to run that risk. We've just changed my audio narrator from the wonderful Robert Bathurst to I felt it was time to have a Quebecois voice. Robert has won all sorts of awards for doing it, and he's been very gracious about it. But I just felt it was time to have a Quebecois voice. So Jean Brossard is going to be doing the next book.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Lovely.
So,
Alan, what was the first novel you ever read as a child? And we're going to also turn this to Louise in just a second.
the first novel I ever read, it was probably Little Men by Louisa May Alcott, and I hated it. I despised it. There was a character named Danny Rugg, and I've never forgiven him. He was a monster, and I thought I could write a better book than that. I think I told my sister that at the time I could write a better book than that, and she said, well, why don't you?
And there. Took a little while.
How about you, Louise?
I'm trying to think. I think I'm probably going to get this wrong, but it was either Charlotte's Web or maybe Anne of Green Gables. I'm not sure. I've never heard of Little Women, but never, and The Secret Garden, and the little princess. These were all so. Oh, Alan, you must have read these. These were also Edwardian, and the father dies, and the child ends up in an orphanage, and she's in an attic somewhere with mean people all around her, and she's actually a princess, and all this sort of
Right. Yes.
Fantasy.
I remember having The Secret Garden read aloud to us in grade 5 if we behaved ourselves.
Mm.
And I don't remember anything about it except that it had a little boy called Dickon in it. And that's the end of my Secret Garden.
Oh, those were wonderful, wonderful, wonderful books. How lucky we were. And I'm not sure how the Christian children's literature now has just exploded. They have it's exciting times, much more choice than we had. And I can't remember, Alan, there being any Canadian children's books. Most of the ones that we read, I believe, were probably British.
I think they were, or American, things like the Wizard of Oz series and Uncle Wiggily and those Howard Garris books about Mother West Wind stories. And there were many of those, and the library was full of them. And I think I read all of them because my grandmother forced them to give me an adult reading ticket. And I needed one because they had a book that was called The History of Funeral Directing in America, and they wouldn't let me take it out. So I had to enlist my grandmother. And
how old were you when you wanted to take out The History of Funeral Directing in America?
I think about 10. I think I was.
Also, I have to say, this is probably a good time to say one of the times that you were in Houston, McKenna's mother took you to the Museum of Funerals, right? The Funeral Museum?
She did. Yeah, it was absolutely one of the greatest days of my life was McKenna's mom, Brenda, took me to several noted places in Houston. And I was walking around with my jaw hanging open because they had wonderful things like in 1938 when Snow White came out. There was a company in the States that offered glass caskets that were exactly like the one in the movie, and you could have your daughter preserved under glass forever until the prince came or something. And I couldn't believe this in the museum to see something like that. I think I wasted a lot of Brenda's time taking photos of it and whatnot. But you have to, don't take my word for it. Go there. You'll thank me forever.
Well, little did we know that you'd been waiting for this museum since you were 10.
I was waiting, yes. And I now have a copy of that book in my library. I found a copy of it. It's I'll show it to you someday.
That's all right. We have a question here for Alan. What made you decide the time period for Flavia? Because it's perfect.
I think with my reading, with my home environment and growing up in a British expat family, most of the literature that we had around the house was quite old, but it was books, newspapers, magazines from England. And I read exhaustively about England. I didn't care what kind of book it was. It could be history or geology or a book about apple growing or maritime matters. So that was the England that I was familiar with, was 1950. So when it came time to write, that seemed to be where my mind gravitated to when I started. It was an area that I was very comfortable with.
And yet you'd never been to England yourself.
No, I hadn't. And it was strange, a very strange thing. I won't go into it in great detail, but I can talk about it some other time. When I did get to England, and I went to a lot of places that I had read about. A lot of them had connections with Dickens. And I was, again, just so blessed, so fortunate. I wound up in the Dickens Museum, the Dickens House, with nobody else there, just me. And I had the run of the place for the morning. And being there and thinking about Oliver Twist, I thought maybe Dickens would show up in the house, and he didn't. I didn't find any trace of Dickens in the museum. But what I found was myself as a child. I was flashed back to sitting by a frosty window reading Oliver Twist by this white light coming through the ice crystals. And I found out that it was me that was overlaid on England, and that was such a shock. It took me quite a long time to get used to it, because I was walking around in kind of 2 states or 3 states for a long time while I was there, and it was only after I got back to London a couple of times that I learned how to cope with it, because I kept flipping back to when I was a child reading the particular book that was involved. But anyway, that's a whole other story.
Wow, what a remarkable experience. You seem so in touch with different layers that other people never experience. That's and it's visceral for you. It's very real.
Yes, yeah, it was. There were a lot of very strange things that happened when I was in London. They weren't supernatural, but they weren't natural either. They were things that I tumbled into without knowing. I automatically went to the right places that I needed to go to, and I don't know. I can't explain how that happened, but.
Do you think you can't, or you're just afraid to be sent to the principal's office again?
That's a good idea, but no, I was
reincarnation. Do you think that you had lived a previous life in?
I don't know. One of my quite early memories was in our house. We had a lot of old Boys' Own annuals lying around from the 1870s, 1880s. They were times when my grandfather was a boy, and I used to love pouring through these with all the adventure stories. And at the end of each story, where they ran out of space, they had a little filler, and they would put in a woodcut with some kind of homely English scene. And I remember turning the page and looking at it, and there was a village street that went running away, and it went around the corner. And I looked at it, and I knew what was around the corner.
Yeah. Wow.
And it just absolutely stopped me in my tracks. It was like having a stroke or something. I don't know what happened, but I realized that I knew what was around the corner, and I had certainly never, ever been there before. And I thought maybe my grandfather was there.
Oh, how beautiful.
So,
that's lovely. Thank you. Thank you for that.
That's one of the strange things that happened to me. But anyway, I'm not afraid of those things. I really cherish them. I quite often call them up and think about it, and I think, that's when things are working the way they're supposed to work.
Yes. Yes. Oh, that's lovely. Can I just ask, and then I want to go back, McKenna, to your questions, but you mentioned about Shirley and whatnot, and both of us know how important it is to have a supportive spouse. Like what, Shirley has been very supportive of you through your career, hasn't she?
She has. She's been incredibly patient and incredibly involved, and she's read the books from cover to cover before they were published, from the entire manuscript. She's made suggestions and said, maybe you should do this, or maybe you should do that. She's never forced me. Well, she did force me once in I think it was about the fifth, it was in the 5th book. And Flavia accidentally killed somebody. And Shirley read it, and she didn't say anything at first. And then when she finished the manuscript, she said, "You can't do that." And of course, when you're writing the book, you can have all kinds of blindness to it. And I said, "Why not?" And she said, you just can't do that, because you would never be able to undo it. You would never write your way out of it. And we can't have Flavia doing something like that, because she wouldn't do that. And I said, well, it was an accident. And she said, it doesn't matter if it was an accident. She can't do that, even as an accident. So you have to rewrite that chapter. And I thought, oh, God. But I did. I took her advice. I knew that she was right, as she was always right. And I rewrote the chapter, and she was very pleased.
and you do feel that she was right. It's not like you held your nose and did it to.
No, she was absolutely dead.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, but it's hard, isn't it? When you must get editor's notes, as do I, and you dig your heels in and say, well, wait a minute, it's perfect.
That's right. Yeah, you do. You get defensive about a book, and I don't know why. I don't know why that is, because there are lots of choices.
Mm.
But once you get locked into something, especially when the story comes pouring out of your subconscious, you tend to think it's right.
Right. Well, you can at least blame Flavia. Yeah. So you can. It's not your fault. If there's something wrong with it, it's Flavia's fault.
That's right. Yeah.
McKenna, is there another question that you'd like?
There is. We have a couple. So one very specific one. Where did Dagger come from, and how did you develop that character?
Dagger just appeared. He was one of the people that appeared. I started with the house. Buckshaw was the center. It was like driving in a marking stake, and then expanded the world outward from there. And Dagger was part of the inner circle, because obviously at almost 11, Flavia can't. There are a lot of things that she can't do, and there are a lot of things that she can't possibly know. And I thought that it would be very nice to have Dagger who can do that, but he doesn't insist on it. He's very quiet in his opinions. And I came to really, really enjoy writing. I feel so honored when there's a scene between Flavia and Dagger that I tend to just pull myself back and try to be quiet, like a fly on the wall. Don't say anything. Don't try and inject any Alan Bradley stuff into this. Just be quiet and write down what happens. And so they're kind of written in a state of suspense. I'm hardly touching the keys. I'm just watching as Flavia and Dagger talk to one another. And
Maybe
yeah, I really love those parts of the book. They're so much fun. I could probably do a whole book with just the two of them talking, but nobody would like it except me.
I wonder if that could be one of your you have the advice for the emerging writers. One of them is sit. Maybe another one could be listen.
Listen. Exactly. Yes. You do a lot of that when you're writing, don't you? You listen.
Yeah. I often think that the best writers in the room are probably not the loudest people in a room.
No, that's right. That's right. I've found, I don't, do you have another question there that you want to switch to?
We have a couple others, but I certainly don't need to interrupt. If you would like, though, so there's a lot of commentary, so I'm just going to excerpt the question. In rereading the series, it appeared as if you knew the storyline for Aunt Felicity early on. Is this correct?
Yes and no. I knew that Flavia had a very fractured relationship with her aunt, that she sort of admired her. She was encouraged to admire her, and her aunt had a very, very flamboyant life in some way that we never heard about. But Flavia never really took to her. I could tell that in the scenes between them, that there was always a stress. And I knew when I wrote the second book that there was a much longer story going. I didn't know it would take 10 books, but I knew that it was longer than one book, and that it involved quite a bit about the family. But I've been finding out as it goes along, they've been revealing to me what's really going on. I still don't know. I don't know what the conclusion of that is. So I'm working on a 12th book. So
Great.
we'll.
That is great.
I was going to ask, and then I was afraid of the answer. So that's wonderful news.
That is great news. Do you have a title?
At the moment, it's called "Take Thy Beak from Out My Heart."
Oh, all right. Now, where did that come from?
It comes from Edgar Allan Poe, from The Raven.
Oh, marvelous! Oh, great. All right, I'm pre-ordering that as well.
So
Thank you.
I have a question for both of you, and then we're going to start the wrapping up process because we've nearly done our hour. For both of you, what has been your favorite part about writing your books, or your favorite part of your books to write?
I think, as I said a minute ago, I think the scenes between Flavia and Dagger, I enjoy. It's a treat to write those, and I just have a feeling of being honored for being allowed to listen while they talk. So those are certainly my favorite parts of the book, and I like that very much. Louise?
Oh, it's so hard, isn't it? Because I think as you talk, I love the scenes that, again, much as you described, for me, the unexpected was the relationship that developed between Jean-Guy and Ruth, which you would think would be so completely different characters, but they're both wounded, and their wounds recognize each other. And so I like those scenes. I love those scenes. And I have to say, I find such comfort in the writing. I mean, it's difficult, as you know. It's like sometimes I just, if I lived on a higher floor, I may not survive. But for me, I think the great gift, and I thought it would be having a book published and holding the book and whatnot. It is the people that I've met along the way. And I mean that sincerely, because one day I will stop writing, but these people will remain friends forever. And I count the great gift of knowing you, Alan, as one of them.
Well, thank you. I have this tucked away. I just wanted to show this. This is one of my great treasures. This is a limited edition of your book, A Great Reckoning.
Oh, yes. Oh, Alan.
And I don't know if you can see it or not. It's absolutely gorgeous, marbled cover.
Yes.
And I keep this next to Dorothy Sayers' The Nine Tailors. These are the two joys of my book collection, as A Great Reckoning and The Nine Tailors are my favorites.
Thank you. And I also want to say, McKenna, we've known each other since day one.
We have.
And you were an early supporter, right? So it's been such a pleasure to be able to get to Houston.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm genuinely so happy to be here with both of you. We've been friends and colleagues since the beginning of both of your series.
Yeah, and we've been through so much together, all of us.
Been through lots together.
Yeah.
We did have a lovely comment just pop up that said, "A great reckoning crinkled when Alan picked it up." So there we go. There's the crinkling coming full circle. Before we wrap today, I have two things for Louise. More crinkling. Louise, this is me just because this is for me just because I've been watching. Tell me about your ostriches.
Oh. What? I'm in England right now, and the truth is that I'll cut it short. Shortly after Michael died, I came to England just to kind of get away and clear my head a little bit. And I was at an art show, sitting there by myself and watching people go by, and off to the left was this, and people would stop and stare at it and laugh. And I thought, I want that. I want to be able to walk into my living room here, and every time I look at it, it brings me joy. And so the ostriches, which apparently are vile birds.
Well, they don't appear vile there. They've just been cutely framing your head this whole time, and I wanted to know where the ostriches came from. You also have a new book coming out in a couple months, The Gray Wolf, which is this number 19?
Number 19. How can you believe it?
I can't believe it. I can't believe how many books both of these series have. Surely that's not possible. But would you tell us a little bit about The Gray Wolf?
Yeah, The Gray Wolf is it's been 2 years since I decided to take a year off. And actually in that year, I wrote The Gray Wolf. So much for taking a year off, because I actually like writing. And it starts with, and because I don't want to give too much away, because it's difficult, isn't it, to talk about specific books. So this one, the challenge is to write, when you write a series, as Alan knows, is not to keep writing the same book. So each book needs to have something that's different. And this book is more of a thriller, really, and to an extent, a bit of a political thriller. And it starts off with Armand and Reine-Marie sitting quietly in their garden in Three Pines. And Armand's phone rings, and he looks down at it. He can see who it is, and he refuses to answer it. And then it rings again, and he refuses. And it rings again, and he refuses. And so the whole issue is, who is it, and why is he refusing to answer this call, which eventually he does, and that sets the whole thing off and running.
Good. It's coming out 2 days before Halloween, right?
Yes, exactly. Thank you. October the 29th. Quite
yeah.
right. Yes.
Good. And the UK edition, will we be able to get it here at the same time?
Yes.
Good.
Exactly the same time.
Good.
Well, I put early on in the chat links in case you're interested in purchasing either of the author's books. We, of course, would love that, and I'm sure that they would be happy to have you do that as well. We have also had a couple questions. If you tuned in late on YouTube and on Facebook, we just have to get through the end of this live presentation, and then as soon as it's not live anymore, you will be able to go back and watch from the beginning in case you missed. I highly recommend starting at the beginning and watching the whole chat, because it was absolutely delightful. I feel very honored that we were able to host both of you today, and that you took time out of your day to do this. And we've had a lovely crowd who have also enjoyed it greatly. So thank you both so much. Alan, so good to see you. Louise, good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you for hosting this, and congratulations, Alan. This is a great day for all of us.
Thank you, Louise. It's such a great thing to be able to talk to you at last, and I hope we'll do it again soon.
Yes.
I'm going to end our live stream. Thanks again to those watching. And Louise and Alan, if you just want to hang on for just a minute, we will say our goodbyes once we're not live. Thank you again. Bye, everyone.